Singapore's headline inflation hit a two-year high in May. Consumer prices here in Singapore have soared to a near 14-year high, extending their streak. Core inflation rose to 4.8% on year in July. That's up from...
Singapore's core inflation is continuing its downward trend after hitting a 14-year high at the start of the year. Core inflation, which excludes accommodation and private transport costs, stands at 4.7% in May. That's down from 5% the month before.
Order members, Parliament will now proceed to the urgent ministerial statement by the Ministry of Trade and Industry on the macroeconomic state of Singapore, with a specific focus on mitigating persistent inflationary pressure. As we all know, our nation operates as a small, highly open economy. This makes us an exceptional hub for global trade. But it also leaves our domestic market highly exposed to global economic fluctuation. I call upon the Honourable Minister for Trade and Industry to deliver her statement. Minister, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To understand our current policies, we must look at how inflation behaved from 2019 to 2023. It has been a wide ride. In 2019, inflation was very low at 0.6% because US-China trade tensions slowed down the global markets. In 2020, COVID-19 changed everything. Lockdowns stopped consumer spending completely, causing deflation at negative 0.2%. In 2021, vaccine rolled out, our economy safely reopened, and inflation jumped to 2.3% as people started buying again. In 2022, the crisis hits. Inflation skyrocketed to a massive 6.1%. This spike was directly caused by the Russia-Ukraine war, which cut off global supply chains and drove up international food and electricity prices. By 2023, our efforts brought it down to 4.8%, while it is dropping. The minister recognized that prices are still too high for comfort.
The member for Bedok has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While I thank the Minister for the statistics, my residents in Bedok do not live in the spreadsheets. They live in the real world. High headline inflation means a painful drop in purchasing power for everyday families. When the price of a basic haircut, a carton of eggs, or a plate of chicken rice keep creeping up every single month, real household income is shrinking. If our domestic price keep rising like this, our local export will also become too expensive for foreign buyers. This will hurt our trade balance and threaten jobs. We need to look deeper. My question is, what internal factors are keeping this fire burning?
Madam Speaker, if I may respond to the member's question from the perspective of our local business. Our SME are caught in a double squeeze. We are fighting two types of inflation simultaneously, which are demand pull inflation and cost pull inflation. For the demand pull inflation happened because people saved cash during the 2020 lockdown. When the gates opened, a massive wave of trend up spending hit the market all at once, pulling prices up. For the cost push inflation is even difficult. After the pandemic, we face a severe labor shortage due to border restrictions. Business had to aggressively raise wages to keep their staff. When you combine higher wages with the expensive imported raw materials the minister mentioned, the total cost of production explodes. Business cannot absorb these losses forever. To survive, they are forced to pass these costs into consumers.
Madam Speaker, this is exactly why the Monetary Authority of Singapore monitors core inflation closely. We intentionally leave out accommodation and private transport from this measure because those are driven by domestic policies like COE not global market trends. People ask why we don't just raise interest rates like the US Federal Reserve does. Singapore is unique. Our financial markets are too small and open to control interest rates. Instead, we use our exchange rate known as policy band. Over the last 2 years, MAS intentionally strengthened the Singapore dollar. A stronger currency gives us two major advantages. First, it makes imports like imported food or crude oil cheaper for us, stopping cost-push inflation at the border. Second, it makes our exports slightly more expensive abroad, which naturally cools down excessive foreign demand.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To back up MAS currency policy, the Ministry of Finance is handling the fiscal side. We are keeping overall government spending tightly balanced so we don't accidentally add fuel to the economic fire. For immediate help on the ground, we have rolled out direct administrative subsidies. We expanded the assurance package, gave out CDC voucher to every household, and provided utility rebates to protect low-income families from high electricity bills. But cash handouts are temporarily band-aids. Our permanent solution is building structural supply resilience. Through our 30 by 30 plan, we are finding high-tech, vertical urban firms to grow food locally. We are also diversifying our trade partners so we never rely on just a few countries for food or energy. Finally, we are giving grants to businesses to automate their workflow. If productivity goes up, companies can pay better wages without needing to raise retail prices.
I want to thank to the Minister, the MAS representative, and the members for this incredibly rose and analytical debate. It is clear to this House that while external geopolitical shock will inevitably challenge an open economy like ours, our survival depends on seamless, agile coordination between MAS, exchange rate appreciation, targeted financial subsidies, and long-term structure supply diversification. Let us continue to work in unison to protect both the livelihood of our citizens and competitiveness of our nation. I see no further amendment. This House stands adjourned. We all can dismiss.
Since gaining independence in 1965, Singapore has transformed from a resource-scarce island into a global financial and tech hub, widely known as one of the four Asian tigers. But because Singapore imports nearly all of its food and energy, managing price stability requires a unique approach. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, closely tracks core inflation. Unlike other nations, MAS excludes accommodation and private road transport because these costs are highly driven by local policy rather than pure market trends. Let's look at the timeline of how inflation moved between 2019 and 2023. In 2019, inflation was a low 0.6% due to US-China trade tensions slowing down global demand. Then, 2020 brought the COVID-19 pandemic, plunging Singapore into a brief deflationary period of negative 0.2% as lockdowns froze consumer spending and travel. By 2021, prices edged up to 2.3% during the initial recovery. But in 2022, inflation skyrocketed to 6.1%, the highest level in over a decade. This dramatic spike was fueled by the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which disrupted global supply chains and sent energy and food prices soaring worldwide. By 2023, inflation began to ease slightly to 4.8% as pressures stabilized, though living costs remained high. Economists break the causes of this inflation down into two main categories: demand pull and cost push inflation. Demand pull occurs when total spending in the economy outpaces total supply. When Singapore reopened post-pandemic in 2021, consumers rushed to buy goods and services they had postponed during lockdowns. This sudden burst of demand hit limited global supplies, forcing prices upward. On the other side, we have cost-push inflation, driven by rising costs of production. First, labor shortages forced companies to raise wages to attract staff, leading to wage-push inflation. Second, because Singapore is a highly open economy, the 2022 geopolitical shock severely pushed up import costs. Higher prices for basic raw materials like oil, wheat, and edible oils instantly trickled down to everyday items, making everything from your bakery bread to electricity more expensive. These inflationary pressures have serious consequences. During the peak of the pandemic, shifting domestic demand caused Singapore's economic growth to contract sharply by negative 5.40% in 2020. When inflation goes unchecked, it directly erodes the purchasing power of households and slows real output growth. For a trade-dependent nation like Singapore, high domestic inflation makes its exports more expensive and less competitive in international markets, threatening the very trade surplus that drives long-term economic stability. To fight this, the government uses contractionary fiscal policy. By raising taxes or lowering public spending, they reduce disposable income, cooling aggregate demand and lowering prices. However, Singapore's main weapon against inflation is unique. Because it is a small, open economy, domestic interest rates are heavily dictated by global flows. Instead of changing interest rates, MAS uses the exchange rate via the Singapore dollar nominal effective exchange rate, or S-dollar NEER. They manage this framework by adjusting three components: the midpoint, the width, and the slope of the policy band. To curb inflation, MAS guides the Singapore dollar on a path of gradual appreciation. A stronger local dollar makes imported food and raw materials cheaper, directly crushing cost-push inflation before it hits consumers. Ultimately, maintaining price stability is vital for Singapore's growth. Moving forward, continuing to invest in modern farming technologies, expanding renewable energy, and encouraging businesses to embrace automation will keep Singapore resilient against future global shocks. Thank you.
Posing.